Madam Speaker, it is of course the evening where we vote on the estimates, and they are estimates in fact because we really never know how much this government is going to spend, so we really only can estimate. And today proves to be no different. But this is of course the result of two things. Well, first of all, it's complete out-of-control spending by this government. We've seen it since 2015, but of course it has increased rapidly since 2020, and now it is just completely out of control. And the second thing, Madam Speaker, as a result of this out-of-control spending, this government makes Canadians pay for their incompetence and their moral disregard time and time again. And this has three negative effects on the nation. It taxes generational wealth, it taxes the middle class, and it destroys productivity. Let's take a quick look at the numbers, Madam Speaker, to justify what I'm saying. We have a current deficit of $39.8 billion. In the beginning, I used to have to double-check myself if I was supposed to be saying million. Now I feel very confident in saying billion, because it is in fact $39.8 billion. New spending of $52.9 billion. This is a huge number, Madam Speaker. Debt servicing costs of $54.1 billion. And additional debt servicing costs, again a surprise I raised in Government Operations Committee to the President of the Treasury Board, of $1.9 billion. You know, I think I would notice an anomaly like this on my credit card were it the case. Now, the government claims to have had a refocus of spending of $15.4 billion. This is their initiative, but this initiative is 3.5 times less than the actual amount of new spending. This is quite a differentiation between the two. So we see here just a government that just has an absolute spending problem. And in fact, it was reported here in the Globe and Mail, an article I have, that the government does not have a revenue problem. Annual federal revenue is increasing and has grown nominally more than $185 billion, or 66.2%, from 2014-15 to 2023-24. Before tabling the budget in April, the government was already anticipating annual revenue to increase by more than $27 billion this year. But the government has chosen to spend every dime it takes in, and then some, instead of being disciplined. Years of unrestrained spending and borrowing have led to a precarious fiscal situation in Ottawa. This government largely chose to continue spending, and clearly raising taxes to generate revenue was unnecessary and could have been avoided with more disciplined spending, so not necessary. Now, Madam Speaker, next I'd like to provide some examples of this wasteful spending. $169.5 million sole-sourced contract for ventilators purchased at $220,000 each, and now have been sold $6 a piece for scrap. That's the first example, Madam Speaker. The second example is Parks Canada spending $12 million on culling deer in British Columbia, a job my caucus colleagues say Canadian hunters would have done for free. And the Auditor General, Madam Speaker, identified at least $32 billion in overpayments and suspicious payments by ESDC. Not a surprise at all by this government. In March, Madam Speaker, the Parliamentary Budget Officer, someone that this government likes to gag, released a report warning that the Prime Minister's government spending plans remained out of control. The amount that taxpayers spend just to service the national debt is expected to go up 33.4% in 2024 and 11.6% in 2025. That means the amount we pay just to cover the interest on the national debt will rise from $35 billion to $46.7 billion in 2024 and $52.1 billion in 2025. It's important to put those figures in perspective because those debt payments offer no services and rob precious dollars from services that this government likes to brag about. The debt payments will double what we will spend on the military, Madam Speaker. So certainly, you know, when I make these references to these amounts, they are not small amounts that I am referring to. Now, Madam Speaker, I'll turn to the second part, the pain that this government inflicts upon its citizens in an effort to compensate for its spending problem out of incompetence and a lack of moral guiding. Now, The first example that I will give is again an article from the Globe and Mail that says 50% of taxpayers who claim more than $250,000 worth of capital gains in a year earn less than $117,592 in normal annual income from 2011 to 2021. So contrary to the government's claims, the capital gains tax will actually affect 4.74 million investors in different Canadian companies. This also means, as I said, regarding the productivity, that potential entrepreneurs or investors are more likely to take their ideas and their money elsewhere, and Canadians will continue to suffer the consequences of a stagnating economy. The carbon tax, Madam Speaker. Just this week, Canadians discovered that for years, the Prime Minister has been hiding the fact that the carbon tax will cost Canadians $30.5 billion by 2030, and that this works out to $1,824 per family in extra annual costs. As well, I'll just remind myself that I will be splitting my time, for the wonderful member from Northumberland, Peterborough South, an individual I like and enjoy very much, Madam Speaker. So to continue with my examples, CTV News said that according to Joseph Steinberg, an associate professor with the University of Toronto's Economic Department, I don't think this policy is likely to be successful. Given what my research into policies on raising taxes on the wealthy has found, since we don't enforce any rules, not surprising given the ESD fraud that I mentioned moments ago, any rules against the tax avoidance and tax evasion, these kinds of policies are really unlikely to raise much, if any, in the way of revenue. The Canada Revenue Agency estimates that Canada loses $3 billion a year in offshore investing, which is close to how much the government projects to bring in each year, with these changes. In addition, Madam Speaker, we had the economist Jack Mintz, who estimated 1.25 million individuals, not just 44,000, will make a capital gain greater than 250,000 at some time in their tax-paying life. Not just this year alone. Many of these people will have relatively modest incomes and only earn extraordinary capital gains at retirement or death. And the official opposition shares these stories every day during question period and in our interventions in the House of Commons. Madam Speaker, how many Canadian investors would be affected by higher capital gains taxes at both the personal and corporate level? In 2021, 4.74 million tax filers, 15.7%. Of those, 69%, 3.29 million, had incomes below $100,000. The middle class, Madam Speaker. The increase in corporate capital gains is going to hurt many Canadian investors with middle class or modest incomes. The Globe and Mail, Madam Speaker, says the Liberal plan to raise taxable portion of capital gains over $250,000 for individuals and of all capital gains for corporations and most trusts is not the end result of a careful examination of tax policy, always reactive, this government, but of the Liberals' need to raise billions of dollars to plug a hole in their latest budget. The increases to the capital gains inclusion rate will take place right when Canada's lagging productivity needs a boost. Higher taxes on investment will be a drag on the economy and could harm our diminishing prosperity. This government has had years in office to address the issues dominating Canadian politics today: housing costs, affordability, and yes, the income gap, which has grown steadily since 2015. And yet, Madam Speaker, they've failed to do so. The Financial Post has a headline that I love: Liberals playing with inclusion rates is divisive policy at its worst. The government ignored almost every single recommendation made about the proposals by very qualified people and great organizations. The Joint Committee on Taxation of the Canadian Bar Association and CPA Canada made some excellent technical recommendations that were ignored. The real goal should be reduced government spending rather than balanced budgets achieved by ever-rising tax rates to cover increasing spending. Madam Speaker, As I come to the last 30 seconds of my speech, I would just like to reiterate what I said at the beginning. This government has a spending problem. It is a significant spending problem that is evident by the numbers that I've put here today. And what do? They don't responsibly address it through lowering their spending, not having unethical overspending like we see with the Scan and the Green Slush Fund. Rather, what they do is they enforce this on Canadians. They make them pay for their incompetence, their moral disregard through tools like the carbon tax and the capital gains tax. This has to stop, Madam Speaker. Tonight in the estimates, though, we're not going to.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm curious to know if part of the estimates we've included here is to fund the Canada Dental Care Plan. And I'm curious if the member opposite will tell Canadians here tonight if that's a program that she would recommend that we cut, and that seniors who need dental care should not have access to that.
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Midnapore.
Yeah, Madam Speaker, I think it's very sad that this government continues to point to failed programs. I've said time and time again here that this government takes so much from Canadians and they give back little crumbs with the hope of keeping Canadians dependent upon this government. And the capital gains tax is just another example of that. If the government would have their way, Madam Speaker, Canadians would be dependent upon this government forever. Conservatives believe in Canadians. We will fix the budget and we will right the deficit and the debt. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Rimouski-Nejet-Témiscouata-Lévesque. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Always a pleasure to hear my colleagues speak. The Conservatives boast that they are the party for common sense. But there's something that's not logical, and that's the $3 million increase in something that already received $22 million supplementary credit. What's the subject? The monarchy. That was the cost of King Charles III's monarchy after the demise of Queen Elizabeth II. $3 million for small medals that were going to be distributed. 70% of Quebecers, Madam Speaker, are against the monarchy. It's an archaic symbol, an anti-democratic institution. I would like to hear what my colleague has to say about this. In the common sense plan, are they against or for the monarchy?
For Calgary-Midnapore.
Oui, merci beaucoup.
Yes, thank you to my colleague. And I won't talk about the monarchy, but I will talk about common sense Conservatives. Common sense is having something for all Canadians, including Canadians living in Quebec. So, through our common sense plan, not only will we have one budget for one province from one government, it will be a budget for all Canadians, including all Quebecers, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments. Okay, the Honourable Member for Edmonton West.
Thanks, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague from Calgary-Midnapore for her wonderful talk today on the estimates. In the main estimates, there's over $46 billion just in interest payments for the debt from this government. One of the members could explain some of the things that Canadians could use that $46 billion for instead of paying off wealthy bankers.
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Midnapore.
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And I think the question is, what couldn't Canadians use this $46 billion for? They could use it to put groceries on their table. They could use it to put gas in their vehicles. They could use it to keep their homes warm. They could use it to buy homes. Were there a better supply of habitations in this country at this time? But the point I think my wonderful colleague from Edmonton West is making is that this government has unnecessarily spent not only this generation, but following generations into complete debt and despair. And these estimates this evening that we will be voting on is just another example of that. So I wish I could offer a brighter outlook to my colleague from Edmonton West, but I see gloom and doom ahead until a Conservative government is elected. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Speaker, I'm curious to know if the member opposite, they say they stand with Ukraine, but in the main estimates, there's funding to help support and train Ukraine. Will they finally stand up and vote to support Ukraine?
The honourable member for Calgary-Midnapore.
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and thank you to my colleague for the question. You know, this is a caucus, this is an opposition, this is a government in waiting that supports democracies around the world. And actually, I was very proud to testify in front of this member at House Procedure today, where her government once again let, frankly, parliamentarians down from all parties and not reporting the cyber attack. But my point is, we support democracies around the world, whether it be Taiwan, whether it be those who have been oppressed in Cuba, whether it is those in South Korea, and that also includes Ukraine. And I think that the first step this government could take is protecting us from those who not only try to intimidate.
Resuming debate.